All right, this video focuses real quick on a summary of Fed 78. So we talked about Fed 78 a little bit in class. We reviewed 6 of the quotes that kind of go along with Fed 78. So this is a quick review, especially if you were absent. So Fed 78 is the second to last foundational document we'll look at this year. It's written by Alexander Hamilton, and it focuses on the judicial branch, right? Like the background for the judicial branch, how the judicial branch should be set up, and how it should best work. We talked about Fed 70 earlier in the year. That was Hamilton's argument about how the executive branch should work, like a single energetic president. This is his look at how the judicial branch should work. So basically, you should have at your disposal that we gave out in class a packet that has these 6 excerpts in it. I encourage you to read the quotes, pause the video, and see if you can't figure out what it means, and then to resume the video, and check to see your understanding. So this is the first quote that you're responsible for. So you can pause the video, read the quote, and then kind of compare it to the answer. Okay, the meaning of this quote is that Hamilton strongly believed that the judicial branch was the least threatening of the 3 branches of government. And this was predominantly because what he says, the judicial branch doesn't possess the power of the sword, doesn't control the military, and it doesn't possess power over the purse, which is to raise taxes. So because these are issues the founding fathers were very worried about, and these are things that the judicial branch is not involved with, they just didn't see how dangerous the judicial branch would be going forward. They thought the legislative branch would be most dangerous, then potentially the executive branch. They didn't see how the judicial branch would be dangerous. That's why, and there's so few rules and regulations that are in the Constitution that relate to the judicial branch. This is the second quote. So if you would take a second, read the quote, and then you can resume the video and check your understanding of the quote. The simple meaning behind this quote is that according to Hamilton, if we went through the trouble of making a constitution, we can't allow Congress to pass laws that contradict the rules in the Constitution. We have to make sure that all the laws that are passed jive and agree with what's in the Constitution. We can't allow laws to be passed that go against the stuff that's in the Constitution. This is the third quote, and this kind of relates to the second one, the one that we just read. So if you take a second, pause the video, read this, and then resume it for check of your understanding. All right, so the meaning of this quote, as we just mentioned with the second one, that ultimately we can't allow laws to be passed that go against what's in the Constitution. So the bottom line is, it doesn't make sense to allow the legislative branch to be the group that determines what laws align with the stuff in the Constitution and go against it. What laws we can allow and which laws are we not going to allow. That's because the legislative branch makes the laws in the first place. That doesn't make sense. So the proper group to be the determiner of whether the laws are okay based on the Constitution or contradict the Constitution shouldn't be Congress, but it should be the judicial branch. That's the job of the courts, right? And that's called judicial review. Judicial review is what the name implies. It's the job of the judicial branch to review the laws passed by Congress and the actions taken by the president to make sure that they go along with what's in the Constitution. Oddly enough, despite the fact that Hamilton wrote this, this concept is not something that's actually in the Constitution. This is something that the Supreme Court gives to itself a decade later or so in the case of Marbury versus Madison. The Supreme Court gives itself the power of judicial review because the Constitution doesn't. For the first bunch of years in our country's history, before this Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court really didn't have much of a role because, what would they do if they're not declaring laws unconstitutional or judging the constitutionality of laws? It's not until this case where they really capture the power that Hamilton writes about in this excerpt. All right, this is a really hard excerpt, so take a second, read the passage, see if you can figure out its understanding, and then resume the play. All right, this excerpt talks about something called judicial independence. And this is the idea that more so than the other branches, the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, has to be protected from being influenced by outside forces. So, for example, like the legislative branch and the executive branch are both very much influenced by the people, right? They're elected. So, if a member of Congress wants to get reelected, or a president wants to get reelected, they have to respond to the will of the people. So Hamilton's arguing that the judicial branch should be set up differently, that it should be independent from outside forces, and that the people shouldn't have as much impact over this group, because this group has to do what's right and not necessarily what's popular, and they can be two very different things. So one of the things that Hamilton mentions is the fact that he feels like the best judicial branch is the one in which the judges are appointed, not voted. This will protect the judges from having to respond directly to the will of the people. It allows the other branches to be influenced by the people, but this branch is protected from the people's influence. This excerpt sort of goes along with the fourth one in your packet. So take a second, read it, and see if you can't figure out what he's talking about. All right, this excerpt also talks about judicial independence. And one of the ways that Hamilton argues that the judicial branch can be independent from outside forces is to give them lifetime appointments, right? You know that most of the federal judges, including those that serve on the Supreme Court, serve for life until they decide they don't want to be a judge anymore or until they die. And Hamilton argues that this is necessary, right? Again, you're not depending on the legislative branch to allow you to continue to do your job. You're not depending on the executive branch to continue to allow you to do your job. You're not depending on the people to continue to allow you to do your job. You have your job for life, and this protects you from being influenced by outside forces and frees you up to make decisions on base what you think is the right decision to make. All right, this last quote deals with also the idea of life terms. So see if you can't give it a read over and then check for your understanding. All right, this quote also focuses on the need for lifetime contracts and life terms, basically for members of the court system, especially the Supreme Court. And basically, Hamilton's argument with this is, look, this job is going to be very, very, very difficult. He uses the phrase voluminous code of laws. The people that are Supreme Court judges are going to have to know a lot about the law. This is going to require really the best and brightest people in society to be those people that are going to hold these positions on the Supreme Court. The problem is the government can't afford to pay these people very much. So how do you attract the best and brightest people that probably could make more money doing other things and practicing law by themselves in their private practice? How do you entice them to come do this job that is really a lot of work and for less money than they could be making elsewhere? You attract them by telling them you're going to give them a job for the rest of their life. There are very few jobs that you can depend on that are going to be there year after year after year. So Hamilton argued the way that we convince people to do a really difficult job for less amount of money than they could be making elsewhere is we give them a job for life, right? So this is a basic synopsis of like some of the key points from Fed 78. Just make sure you give it a look over.